Call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to roll call.
Casey Benner,
Here.
Mark Buckeye, Tom Hooper, Whitney Tucker,
Here.
Bill Hart.
Here.
We're going to move on to the approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
The motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on to the approval of minutes from last meeting, which was November 21st of 2022.
Make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from last meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to introduction of evidence.
So we have ordinance, design guidelines, copies of this. There is an additional item at your, each of your seats. There was a change
That was
in
on the revision of the
Yes.
stand of
yes, the original.
exposed fastener to standing seam, yes.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Accept.
And I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to accept the evidence. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Moving on to old business.
So, not too much change from last on the historic preservation grant. I am working on drafting the request for proposal. Andrew from Chippo was here today, and he'll talk to us later if you have questions, but did take a look at the request for proposal we have used in the past. It looks fine as the form. Once I get it completed, though, I will certainly send it in to him for approval. Then we'll go out. That'll most likely happen.
Okay. Moving on to new business. We will start with SGHC 007-23-1 to receive a certificate of appropriateness to replace an asphalt shingle roof with an exposed fastener metal roof at 116 South Main, but we have the correction for the steel fastener.
Would be amended motion if it makes one to a standing seam. And you have new material, which is Horizon Lock with the specs in front of you.
What was the color?
It's sort of a middle red. I think it's called rustic. Yes, rustic.
Okay, with that, I think it meets the guidelines,
Yeah.
even better than the original product. I was happy to see that.
Yeah,
standing
me
seam.
too. And the color's good because it's right there. It's the earth
Right.
tones that's requested.
I'll make a motion that we approve the appropriate for replacing the asphalt shingle roof with a standing seam metal roof.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to replace the roof with the standing seam. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Moving on to SGHC 007-23-2 to receive a certificate of appropriateness to replace the masonite wood siding on the dormers with party board siding or standing seam siding at 116 South. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just, that, the or seems arbitrary, like, does that mean we're gonna let them do either or they want approval for either or?
You're looking, but want us whatever you
Sure.
have choice.
Would you like me to come up?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
I think that for the most part, we would prefer the hardy board and then use the, I keep wanting to say standing seam, but the covered fastener metal as a plan B. I know that there's some issue there with wood and the metal roof and repair wood and touch up paint and windows, because obviously with the, they're not original windows, but with the older glass windows, they're going to need some more care. You know, we fixed them up prior to doing the roof. That was one thing we wanted to make sure we did. But there's just obviously some concern with the wood dormers, and it's a bit of a nightmare with all the different pitches, and there's I think 5 dormers on the building. They were saying there's some kind of issue with the overlapping of siding and everything. They suggested the hardy board. We said, well, not sure. I think we included some sample pictures of what it looks like with the metal siding instead. It's probably a little hard to envision because those are sort of modern looking buildings and designs, but it does give you at least a little bit of an idea of what it would look like. I don't know if I answered your question, but no, it's not an either or. I think number one would be, preference would be hardy board, and then secondary. Okay.
What type of pattern on the hardy? Like what's there? Or?
Yes, we're looking to, well, no, I guess not what's there, because what's there is masonite.
Masonite.
Yeah.
So this would be
Flat
horizontal
Yeah.
wood paneling, and I think that, you know, we get it to match the color of the paint, because we're going to sort of a gray, blue, navy, probably not too far away from on the chairs.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm fine with the hardy. I prefer the hardy board than the
Yeah,
metal. to
so
tell you the
so
truth.
would I.
Yeah.
Just because that seems to be the preferred kind of treatment around town in the historic district.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's even listed in the Secretary of Standards, one of their bulletins is talking about that. Okay, I will make a motion to approve the replacement of the masonite with the hardy board.
Hardy board siding.
Hardy board
Yes,
siding.
yeah, and I'd second it. I'll second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to replace the masonite wood siding with the hardy board siding. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Better.
Moving on to SGHC 007-23-3 to receive a certificate of appropriateness to replace the half-round guttering with K-style 5-inch guttering at 116 South Main. Do we have any questions on the guttering?
K-style meaning what you can just get from any guttering company today. Yeah. Yeah. I have a little bit more of a problem with that than I kind of walked the block too to see what was there. I think the church has a half-round guttering. There are at least one or two other buildings that still have the half-round on them. It seemed to be more in the historical context of that block, which I think is has a very high significance, high quality. So is it just cost?
No, it's for efficiency too. The half round is not as deep, so it doesn't hold as much water. It gets clogged a lot easier. And with clogging issues, it's holding water, it's pulling away on the roof a little bit. Starts to become a little bit of a. And right now there is leakage issues. There's issues with it getting clogged on the half round. So I understand it's in a historic district. There is a portion of the house that's 1820, but it's not. We don't interpret it as a museum house. It's an educational facility. We conduct meetings, and there's essentially classes and stuff, so it'd be something along those lines. So we would prefer the K-style. That's why. It's more of a, it's not about a look to it.
Drainage problems already?
Well, I'm going with what the roofer would recommend, so.
I have a building with the same sort of pitch to the roof, and I had 5-inch gutters on my house, and they're gone. And I selected a larger guttering, and it really carries the water away from the house a lot better. I haven't had any wet basement problems that I had before we did that. And I would think that even that around guttering could be gotten in a larger size as well. You know, the problem being, my problem with the regular K-style being that, you know, these vernacular buildings do have less fussy details. You know, it's more, the design elements are more sparse. So I think that the half-round guttering gives a lot more essence, historical essence than if we just went with, you know, run-of-the-mill store-bought, you know, guttering. I don't know. How do you guys feel?
No,
Visually, the half round, it really fits the nature of the building.
Yeah, I thought so.
And the historic buildings that I know that have it, got a variety of roof designs, and I haven't seen any guttering, overflow, and that type of thing with it, because it is available in several diameters.
Yeah.
Well, we could get into the argument about half-round guttering historically wasn't introduced till what, about 1900?
Yeah, when was K-style guttering?
When it was K-style guttering, so it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
I don't know about that. And standing seam metal was introduced around what time?
Mid-19th century.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
the house,
the half round would seem more appropriate to the age of the
roofing system.
of the roofing system, the historic roofing system.
Yeah.
Have any additional questions?
I do not. Motion. I will make a motion to deny the K-style roofing system, guttering system based on historical context, and then the standards as well, saying to replace in kind. Give you that number. Looking at it.
Yeah.
H1, original architectural details.
Okay, so I have a motion to deny the K-style guttering based on the H1 guidelines. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to deny based on our H1 guidelines. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yeah. See with your name on it.
Jeff and Robbie, I'll work through all of our having a way.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our resolution, HC 2023-1, the Paul Brune Historic Preservation Grant.
I have trouble with it. Yes, so Baldwin Historic Revitalization Grants Program. I put a quick 2-page piece of information at your seat. This is a no-match federal grant for rural certified local governments that supports a revitalization sub-grant program. So money would flow through, I say us, we would have to determine what form that would take, us, down, applicant. Again, it's no match. The grants range from $200,000 to $700,000. Focusing in on an amount around $250,000. I'd just like to, sure I have here to support that letter with application. That letter.
I second.
So I have a motion and a second to support the resolution and sending in the letter. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I applied for one of these at Missouri Preservation. I
This
commend you, and I
round?
feel your pain. No, last round.
If we do, we'll include grant administration, most likely by the arts. But I appreciate it. That's all for that.
Moving on to the certified local government presentation from the Missouri State Historic Preservation Office.
Who is SHPO's certified local government representative here this evening, and Andrew Dial, who is grant administrator? Grant manager.
I'm having flashbacks to work.
Yeah, really.
John and Andrew arrived about 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we met for about an hour and went over our certified local government status. John will go back to the office and type up a report, and he'll have it for us. But all things point to we're doing a fine job. You're doing it.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Well, maybe I should present over there, otherwise it'll be like an invisible guy.
Oh, the cameras point both directions. So
Oh,
you-
okay, well, maybe I'll just stand up here then.
In fact, you can see
you're
yourself
everywhere.
back there at the back TV.
Oh. Well, we're really glad to be here today. Of course, you all are one of the most historic towns in the entire state. We were talking about once every 4 years, we're supposed to do an evaluation of each of the CLGs. So this happens to be St. Genevieve's turn, and you guys have a really good program going on. You have another park staff on your commissions. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the CLG program, and then I'll turn it over to Andrew, and he'll talk about grants and funding and some ideas for you all. In case you're wondering about the CLG program, the National Historic Preservation Act was amended in 1980. It allowed for federal assistance to go directly to local communities. If they were willing to meet federal and state standards for historic preservation, then these communities would be certified local. Here's a map. You can see in blue all the certified local governments in the country. You can pretty much make out the outline of the country through these governments. Right now there's, I think, 2,900, somewhere around in there, close to 3,000 certified local governments in the Missouri has 64 certified local governments. So the certified local government program started in 1980, but it really got cranking in 1985 because the National Park Service allowed the Historic Preservation Fund grant to go to the local communities. This really got it going. In Missouri, by the end of 1986, Missouri has its first 7 CLGs a year. The program's grown over the years. So we started out with 7 in 1986. Right now we have 64. I put a picture of Walt Disney here because the newest CLG in Missouri was just this last March, and is Marceline, boyhood home of Walt Disney. There's kind of 5 requirements for the CLG program. The first one is to enforce state or local legislation for the designation and protection of historic sites. One of the big keys to being a CLG is that the community enacts a historic preservation ordinance. One of the things that SHPO provides free of charge to any community is we'll review any amendments to ordinances or creation of new ordinances, make sure that it conforms with the National Park Service standards for historic preservation. Second one is the local government will establish and maintain an adequate and qualified historic preservation review commission. There's some minimum requirements for the review commission. I think the program gives communities a lot of leeway here because obviously the needs of St. Genevieve are going to be different than the needs of St. Louis, different than the needs of Springfield. But they do require at least 5 members. It's awfully hard to fill up the commissions full of preservation professionals from your local community. But we do want everyone on the commission to have an interest and knowledge of historic preservation, which you all do. There's some requirements about how long a commissioner's term should be. They should be staggered. Filling vacancies on the commission, having regular meetings. They require each commissioner to attend at least 1 training session each year. It doesn't have to be in person. You know, we're now in the pandemic age. It could be online. Webinars, like. And then, of course, David submits all the documentation to SHPO. So what are the primary responsibilities of a commission? Survey and designate resources located within your CLG, which you all are doing this evening. Review all alterations, work, new construction, etc., that affect designated properties. Another one is review any new or amended National Register of Historic Place nominations that would be made in your community. If you all do get new National Register nominations, the Advisory Council very much wants to see that you all have reviewed this and have input. Local government shall maintain a system for survey and inventory of historic properties. There's, kind of, you all know, there's sort of 2-pronged approach that happens. You have properties that are on the National Register. This protects them from certain federal undertakings. It can open them up for certain kinds of funding. Big one is it can open the property up for historic tax credit for the rehabilitation of the program. And then CLGs will also locally designate historic properties, and that opens them up for a review, a design review by the commission. So a lot of times you have kind of National Register properties, and then you have locally designated properties. The locally designated properties do not have to be on the National Register. Sometimes properties that are important to a local community aren't deemed as eligible for the National Register, but that doesn't disqualify them from being designated locally. The National Park Service wants to see sort of a separate process. They don't want like some property put on the National Register and then it automatically becomes a locally designated property. They want to see it go through the process. That way you have the public input of homeowners who will have due process into the designation of the property for design review. Local government shall provide for adequate public participation, local historic preservation program. You know, opening up all the things you do. This one is kind of the redundant category. Basically, it says that the local government will do all the other first four things that we talked about. So it's kind of number 5 is kind of redundant. There's some additional things for the CLG to be what's called in good standing. And good standing is important because CLG needs to be in good standing in order to qualify for the historic preservation grants and other things. There's a few other requirements. Submit meeting agendas and meeting minutes to SHPO, submit an annual report to SHPO, and participate in the evaluation at least once every 4 years. And you guys have a really good program here. You're doing all these things. There are some benefits being a CLG. You get enhanced eligibility for grant money projects, and Andrew will talk more about that. You get technical assistance from the SHPO. You direct participation in the National Register of Historic Places program. Kind of connects you into a network of local, state, federal historic preservation groups, such as the National Alliance for Preservation Commissions. And the CLG program kind of has a nice established framework for running a local historic preservation program. There's also a lot of just intangible sort of community-derived benefits, which you all know very well. It gives you a mechanism and a way to identify the historic properties in your community and what makes your community distinct. Fosters civic pride. Like living in communities with nice historic districts, historic properties. Maintains property values. There's a lot of economic benefits to having a good local historic preservation program. Really, you guys are the ones who are doing historic preservation. Those of us at SHPO, we're more just like policy people. So you guys are the one on the ground that are actually doing the historic preservation. How does a community become a CLG? And I won't get into this in depth, but there's kind of a process. If communities want to be a CLG, if you know other communities in the state and you think this is a good program for them, please refer them to us. Need to pass a historic preservation ordinance, appoint a historic preservation commission, to submit an application. There's such things as resumes for the commissioners, assurances from the mayor that you know, the community's bought into this. Then the SHPO reviews all this. It goes to the National Park Service. National Park Service reviews it, and then once National Park Service signs off on it, then the community officially becomes a CLG. So I kind of went through this awfully fast, but I wanted to give a time for Andrew too. So, does anybody have any questions?
Does the NAPC, the National Association of Preservation Commissions, they have an annual conference?
Yeah, well, biannual, it's every other year.
Biannual,
In fact, Andrew and I, we were fortunate to get to go to their one they had this last July in Cincinnati. It was really good. And I think the memberships aren't too terribly expensive, and it's based on the population of your community. And you might look into it because they do have webinars, training, things like that.
Right.
That was one of the things I was going to ask / point out was John is, or SHPO, I guess, is working on some webinars and training sessions that will be available. But they also have some, and we could discuss joining. We belong to a few organizations, but not that one.
Yeah, and we're hoping to have some videos come out. Now we're in the post-pandemic world, and it is a lot easier to do webinars, videos, and things, and travel across the state for trainings. And a lot of you have day jobs and can't really afford to do this. So we're hoping that we're working toward making this a lot easier and available for you guys. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, et merci pour l'opportunité de présenter devant vous dans ce lieu historique français. Did graduate work in French colonial history, so I read a bit about French, or Saint Genevieve, that came up in the literature all the time, so it's exciting to actually be in a place where I can, where that comes close to home, and to actually see the places I've read about. But anyway, as John said, I am the grants manager at the State Historic Preservation Office. And ever since becoming grants manager, about once a week or so, somebody calls into my cubicle in Jefferson City and says something like, I just bought an old house and it has some beautiful woodwork, it's got some great stained glass windows, but the roof needs a bit of work and the porch is sagging, and I hear you guys give out grants. Tell me about these grants. What can you do for me? I'm sure as historic preservation commissioners, you guys get similar questions along those lines. So I want to tell you about walk you through my response to those types of inquiries, so that hopefully you can point people in the right directions as well. So first, yes, we do give out grants at SHPO. We get a large grant every year from the Historic Preservation Fund, which is managed by the Park Service. And from that large grant, we give out between $150,000 and $200,000 every year in subgrants. These are designed specifically for our CLGs. They're not exclusively for our CLGs, so about 50 to 75% of that money goes to our CLGs. But others, not only CLGs can apply, also municipalities, counties, and also nonprofits with a historic preservation mission. The grants are a 60-40 match. So we give you the 60%, you provide the 40%. Most of this you guys should already know since you have applied for these grants in the past, you've already had them. But I still like to talk about it. Let's talk about it anyway. Each award is capped at $50,000, and the duration of the work to be done is an 18-month duration. So if you were to apply this coming summer, usually the application period opens summer, early fall. If you were to apply in 2023, the work for that would happen in the summer of 2024 to February 2026. So the grant that you guys currently have is going to end in February of 2025. The Park Service recently extended the amount of time that we have the grant money, so we pass that on to you, so you have extended time with that grant as well. We fund three main areas of projects. We have a planning and outreach area, which is about, as it says, the drawing up planning documents or doing outreach work. We can also fund survey work, National Register, we have a category for that. And then we can do pre-construction work, or the planning for construction. Each of these, if you apply for a grant, each of these has a different application form, which is why they're listed in three different areas. But I'll walk through each of those a little bit more closely. So in the National Register and Survey area, that's pretty clear and self-explanatory. We fund surveys, both architectural and archaeological. We will also fund nominations to the National Register of Historic Places, or amendments to a National Register district. In the pre-construction area, we can fund things like maintenance plans. We just finished funding a grant to Montague County to do a maintenance plan for their courthouse. And it was literally a list of, here are the major potential maintenance things that you'll have to worry about in the next few years. Here's the priorities for those. Here's how much we expect it to cost. So they had essentially a shopping list of what needs to be done and what good bids should be on that. The National Park Service just came out with new standards for flood adaptation on historic buildings. That's something that is a bit of relevance in this community. We can fund the planning work for applying those to a specific structure. We've also funded, we just finished a grant for structures in Jefferson City that were damaged by the 2019 tornado that went through there. And the city acquired some of those structures and wanted to put them up for bid for interested parties who would rehabilitate those structures. And they used a grant from us to do engineering or structural assessments of those, so that once again the buyer knew how much it would cost to repair those. And I think they've gotten bids on at least one of those structures, and some of the others are still out for bid. So those are some things you can do with that. One thing about the pre-construction is that the structure has to be on the National Register of Historic Places. That's a requirement from the Park Service, and it has to be publicly owned. This is because we don't want it to publicly own city halls and county courthouses. They don't have access to tax credits and things like that, so we want to reserve it for those types of places. And finally, in the planning and outreach category, this can be very broad, this can be a lot more a bit of a grab bag, but we fund things like design guidelines. If you ever wanted to update your design guidelines or create a historic preservation plan, you could look to our office for funding. There are various other forms of outreach that can be funded with our grants. So Joplin just finished a grant with us to do brochures for their historic district that were mailed out to all the property owners. I understand you guys already do that type of thing. But if you wanted to do more of it, that type of outreach. Workshops. Again, you guys already do workshops, so you know about this quite well. You mentioned NAPC. Our grants can be used to send people to the NAPC forum, which in 2024 will be in Palm Beach, Florida. So,
Okay,
yes.
we're joining.
There you go. So these are the type, or other workshops or other training that you want to do as commissioners. Our job is to support you in doing that. And so there's the opportunity to apply for our funding. What we do not fund. We do not fund individuals. As I said, only CLGs, municipalities, counties, nonprofits, system of historic preservation mandates are eligible applicants. We also do not fund construction work. It's expensive, it requires an easement, it's complicated, we want to reserve our money for other things. Archaeological digs as well, we do not fund, that's the requirement that the Park Service puts on our funding is it can't do that. Also, permanent interpretation and exhibits in museums. Whoever wrote the rules around our funding did not want us to be funding house museums. They wanted us to focus more specifically on historic structures and repair work. So the way I jokingly describe this is if you put one brick on top of another, if you break ground on anything, or if you put up a sign for it, you have to look somewhere else for your funding. Sorry, our HPF money cannot do it. There is some fine print as well with these. This is federal funding that we are passing to you, so it has federal strings attached to it. Those rules for federal funding are described in 2 CFR 200. If you're doing a Paul Brun grant, you will become very knowledgeable about 2 CFR 200 because you'll be the one having to apply those rules to others. There's also the Historic Preservation Fund Grants Manual. So funding that comes from the Historic Preservation Fund has to follow that. Those rules specific to that fund. By the way, in regards to the Historic Preservation Fund, Congress in its most recent budget recently increased the amount of money that can be dispensed from the Historic Preservation Fund this year. Their last budget said they could dispense $150 million. This year they can expend $204 million. So there's more money available to be applied for. There's more money for these types of things. SHPOs are getting increased. All SHPO funding is getting increased across the board by about $4 million. We're only going to see a small portion of that, but it is there. And that means that there's more money to be applied for. Anyway, the work has to be completed by someone who follows certain qualifications. what the Secretary of the Interior sets. This is state funding, so it has to follow the state of Missouri's procurement standards. And if you're doing a pre-construction project, the planning also has to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards. As Historic Preservation Commission, just from the conversations I've heard tonight, it sounds like you guys are very familiar with this. So this is just a quick refresher in that regard. So if our grants are mostly designed for our CLGs, usually they're not very helpful to that person who's calling me about that old house that needs help to it. So the next question I usually ask them is whether it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Because there are grants and tax credits where the limiting factor is it has to be something on the register. And the way to find whether it's on the register, you go to our website. On the right-hand side, there's a set of links. One of them will take you to a GIS map, which you can plug in the address, and if it's in the green blob, congratulations, it's within a district. You can find out whether it's a contributing building by going to the our nominations by county. That will tell you whether it's a contributing member. If it is, then I get to talk to them about tax credits. The federal government and the state of Missouri both offer tax credits for historic preservation work. 20% from the federal side if it's an income-producing property, 25% if it's a income-producing or owner-occupied. There are lots of fine print about this, about what qualifies, what type of work is needed, and it has to be listed in the National Register, but most of the people who call into my office, this is where they end up, because they're usually residential property owners, and if they're lucky enough to be on the register, this is where the bucket they fall into. If they don't fall into that, or if there are potential grant opportunities, if I can talk to them a bit more about the property, about what they may or may not fit, then we end up talking about grants. So what are some of the grants that are available? First, to talk a bit about federal grants and the requirements thereof. This applies some rules that apply generally to federal grants. The site usually has to be listed on the National Register or eligible for it. The Park Service does this rather nice thing where they will let you listing the site be part of the project. So you don't have to be actually listed to apply for it, but you do have to be eligible and show that you're eligible. And then the nomination itself is part of the grant project. But that is a requirement. The work, as with our grants, has to follow Secretary of the Interior standards. And if it's a construction project, then it comes with an easement. This is a requirement of federal grants. The federal government wants to protect its investment, and the easement is how they do that. There also may be other limitations, depending on what the program itself may be. By the way, this is a tax credit project in St. Joseph. That's not a grant project, but it does show the potential of these types of financial incentives. So one example of a federal grant that has some rather wonky requirements to it, the Save America's Treasures grant. This is still one of the very popular grants in Missouri. I think we've got there's a good number of places in Missouri that have gotten this grant. It can be used for either archival conservation or building preservation work. And as you can see, there's a pretty good amount of money that can be given out. But the site has to be listed on the National Register at a national level of significance, not just local. And it can only be used once. So if you use it to repair the roof, and then the next year a flood hits, sorry, you've used your one shot, you're out of luck. But that doesn't stop people from applying for it. Jasper County Courthouse in Carthage is one of the places that has gotten it. The Hall of Waters in Excelsior Springs is another. So it is available to be applied for. I oftentimes get calls from African American communities or African American sites, churches, schools, a jazz club in Kansas City called once, asking about funding for their properties. I've been impressed at just how active the African American community is here, how deep a sense of history they have in Missouri, and how interested they are in preserving it. And there is money for that. The National Park Service has an African American Civil Rights Grant Program. They interpret the civil rights as being, the struggle for civil rights as being pretty much all of African American history. So it's pretty broad. So that is one possibility. The National Trust for Historic Preservation also has several grants that are a little bit more specific. but there is money for that as well. So if the site if the person calling me, I can mention this to them. Another option for more, not just African American communities, but more broadly underrepresented. The National Park Service has 2 grant programs. One that is designed to diversify the National Register. So it won't fund construction, but it will fund surveys, nominations, historic contexts, these types of things which help to put more stuff on the register. They also have, they do have another program that will fund construction. That is for equal rights, more broadly, the struggle for equal rights. So if you have a site that's connected to that in your town, that is, this is one place that, or pot of money that could be applied for. Every once in a while, a church calls me and says, we need construction money for our church. The National Trust, the National Fund for Sacred Spaces offers grants of up to $250,000 for churches. Cemeteries as well. At least once a month I get a call from the cemetery that says we need money for this, to cut trees or to find headstones or those types of things. I have yet to find a good grant for cemeteries. There's a great need for it. The money just is not out there, at least not that I know of. But SHPO does do a training program where at least twice a year, people from our office will go out to a cemetery and will teach the best practices for cleaning headstones and maintenance and things like that. So call our office. John is actually one of the people in charge of that program, the cemetery program. So if you have questions about, if you're interested in that, he is the person to talk to. If it's a museum that is calling me. The Jeffress Families Foundation is dedicated to historic preservation in the Midwest. They will give money for a historic structure report at a 50-50% match. So they'll tell you what's wrong with the building. And then they will also give you challenge grants that will cover a third of the cost of doing that repair. You're supposed to go out and raise the other 2/3, but it's a start. The National Trust also has a fund for historic interiors that is very competitive. You have to be a member of the National Trust or Main Street America, because if you join Main Street, the National Trust membership is thrown in there. That's a requirement to be eligible for the grant, but it is there. If you are a member of the National Trust or of Main Street, there are several grant opportunities that they have that can be used for preservation projects more broadly. This includes preservation outreach, just like our grants, so things like workshops, brochures, stuff like that. But they can also fund, I think, construction as well. The Hart Family Foundation for Small Towns. This might be something that's, St. Genevieve is on the smaller side, so this is something that you would potentially fit. That can be used for a lot of the things that our grants are for design guidelines, historic structure reports, outreach activities, things such as that. The National Park Service is also running a series of grants right now, a grant program in honor of the 250th anniversary of the U.S., which is in 2025. This is money that's temporary. It's not going to be here for very long, and it's going to go away. It also has some rather wonky requirements. So they do give money for construction, but the sites have to be in our National Register listed, and they have to have a period of significance predating 1800. If only we had a town in Missouri that was founded before 1800 and has a large collection of colonial era buildings. Where could that be, I wonder? Anyway, this actually used to be, so that grant is there. The Daughters of the American Revolution also have a grant program, a smaller grant program for construction projects, but it has to have sponsorship from a Daughter of the American Revolution's chapter. They do have a preference for founding era sites. That's not a requirement, but it is a preference for it. So once again, St. Genevieve has certain advantages that other towns in Missouri would not have. They also, if you guys aren't on Route 66, so I'll skip that a little bit, but if you know places that are on Route 66, there are grants available for that. for a town, if it's, every once in a while a place from a town will call me, or for a historic preservation commission like yourself. I learned recently that T-Mobile, the cell phone company, offers grants to small towns. This is not historic preservation specific. These are for community development and community projects, but historic buildings can qualify for that. So these grants are available in here. Excelsior Springs has gotten one. I also learned recently about there's a foundation that creates revolving funds. If you're familiar with a revolving fund, this can be a pot of money that can be used to buy historic structures that are about to be demolished or that there are no plans for, to hold on to them long enough to find a buyer so that they can be saved. They can also be used to give out loans. We have a state revolving fund that was used to give out loans for courthouses for a while. There is a foundation that can provide seed money for revolving funds. Joplin just used the money, just went through this process, and now has a revolving fund from it. There are pluses and minuses to a revolving fund. They can be rather complicated to use, and you are getting into the real estate market a bit if you go that route, but the money is there, and it is a possibility. Paul Brun, you guys are familiar with Paul Brun. Missouri, our sister department, the Department of Economic Development, also has a downtown revitalization program where they will give you a large chunk of money to revitalize your downtown. I don't even know enough about this project to be this grant project to be dangerous, but it does exist. You can look it up and look into it more. And then finally, I usually, in whatever email response I give to whoever's calling me, I usually direct them to Missouri Preservation, our statewide nonprofit. They have a list of grant opportunities on their website, most of which I've gone through today, but people can, I tell people to look, that's a good place to start. The National Trust also has a list of grant opportunities on its website. Most of the applicable ones I've gone through today, but that's another good place to start. Finally, this is some things that make me always feel happy as a grants manager and some things that annoy me. I always feel happy seeing these types of headlines, that people are applying to federal grant money and they're bringing that grant money to Missouri. Those are federal dollars coming to us. I feel excited about that. But the Park Service has a maps on its websites of where people have applied for these grants in the past, where they've dispersed this money. Missouri, in some cases, looks kind of blank compared to the states around us. This always makes me feel like we can do better. There's money out there. There are opportunities out there. So I take that as a challenge to bring more of bring more of those resources here. So, any questions?
So, residential folks who have a National Register building, historic tax credits is really where you guide them, because I receive many of those same calls.
That is usually the best place, yes. That's where I tend to put them, is our tax credit program. Yep. But if you're doing a Paul Brun grant as well, that will provide opportunities too.
Yes, and that was one of the allures of that grant, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew.
Very informative.
Okay, we're going to move on to administrative approvals.
Two for you. There, one at 103 North Main. This signature looks very familiar. For roof coating. And second is at 371 Jefferson, which is a roof replacement on the home. If you're familiar with that property, there is a local landmark ice house in the back of that. Well, actually, it's in the middle of the property, but behind the house, it's not for that structure. It's just for the house.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Any public comments? Okay. Thanks. We can adjourn.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.